All right, here we are, roaming inside the cage. We're going to be starting tonight on page 19. And, oh, wait, it's not page 19. Is there page 19?
Yeah, that's
Man, I
right.
am just having one of those days. Yes. Um, we are going to wrap up chapter one. Can you imagine? We're actually going to complete chapter one. And so this has been what he called a digression um, into the beginnings of the Enneatype. You know, what happens to us as infants? What happens to us in early child development that creates the Enneatype, that creates the personality and the ego shell, as he's going to call it tonight? Where does it come from? How do we differentiate as infants and children? Is it nature? Is it nurture? Is it both? You know, he's been kind of diving into all these sorts of questions and giving us the three centers of experience and giving us the soul defined as a presence, joy, and awareness of other people's awareness, or what was it? Oh, yeah, presence, joy, and love. So he's been giving us these images of what happens to us early on and how we develop into all the different enneatypes and all the different personality types and so on and so forth. So I really enjoy the way that he expresses himself, and the way that he expresses the onset of the ego tonight is going to be really interesting as well. So let's dive into that. Before we do, anything left over from last week, unfinished business, anything that you want to bring up, undeveloped, thinking about, questions? Okie dokie. So we just went through um, the three shocks of embodiment. Okay, loss of wholeness, loss of emotional connection, loss of trust.
Mm.
Continue on from there. Bottom of page 19. Do these three shocks somehow influence the way small children develop a preference to depend upon one center of experience more than the others? Okay, so the centers of experience were body, heart, and mind, remember? So do these three shocks, loss of wholeness, loss of joy, loss of trust, somehow influence the way small children develop a preference to depend upon one center of experience more than the others? All children presumably experience all three shocks, but not all seem to experience them to the same degree. Are those most affected by the shock of loss of wholeness likely to become body types? Those most hurt by the shock of lost emotional connection predisposed to become heart types? And those most traumatized by the shock of lost trust inclined toward mental types? Or does the causality perhaps work the other way around? A native predisposition toward a particular center, making the infant more prone to a certain shock. The question, like all nature nurture questions, is intriguing, but not always very enlightening. Its answer will lie at the level of knowledge about. Useful, interesting, perhaps necessary to seek, but only a placeholder until a more complete theory arrives. However, the causal connection between the three shocks and the three centers of experience is conceptualized. The cumulative effect of the three shocks upon the child's ability to remain open to the full flow of energy is a gradual loss of presence and the emergence of reactivity and a loss of harmony. A person's actual connection to original energy cannot ever be lost. If it were, one would simply cease to exist. But awareness of the connection can be lost. And as it is lost, a blockage of energy occurs. The blockage acts like a kink in a hose. Or to use an example from living things, when a tree's energy is diverted outward toward a new branch, a mark forms within the fiber of the wood at the place where the original energy changed course. We call the mark a knot hole. Something similar happens in developing children's consciousness. In developing children's consciousness, an awareness of original essence is lost. Life energy is constricted, forming a kind of psychic knothole. A pattern of reactions crystallizes like a protective shell around this knothole. The shell is the ego. All egos, regardless of their eventual type, are basically the same. They are the result of the soul's identification with form as it loses sight of its nature as formless consciousness. That is to say, the infant gradually becomes convinced by the shocks of embodiment that he or she is this body with these feelings and these thoughts, and that he or she is only this. It is this identification, I am me and only a me, that ultimately makes us feel separate, alone, and lost. Okay, he said a ton of stuff there. Before we go back and start to break it apart a bit, any comments, thoughts, initial reactions, violent objections?
I just really like the way that he describes the ego. All egos are basically the result of the soul's identification with form as it loses sight of its nature as formless consciousness. I've never really heard of it that way, but um that definitely makes sense. Not losing the awareness of being a part of everything else and just being this singleness and I and me and alone. And I just really like that.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's an interesting take. Okay, well, let's go back to the beginning of the section. So first ask the question whether these shocks of shocks to embodiment somehow influence the way small children develop a preference to depend on one center of experience more than all the others. And remember, the Enneagram is going to be broken into those three areas, whether it's body, heart, or mind. So that's going to encompass, three of the Enneatypes as you go around the circle. All children presumably experience all three shocks, but not all seem to experience them to the same degree. This made me think of Bill's comment last week, where he was um, kind of resisting the generalities that Schafer was making in regards to all of this. And he was saying, that's an overgeneralization. I don't see how that applies. So he's kind of putting a caveat in here, right? That all children presumably experience all three shocks, but not all seem to experience them to the same degree. So he's starting to say, okay, these generalities that we made in terms of these three, this is something that's happening to every child. All of us are experiencing this, but not to the same degree. So he's pulling back a little bit on some of the generalities that he made that seem to be more strict in terms of the three types. So then he's saying, where's the causality here? Are those most affected by the shock of lost wholeness likely to become body types? Those most hurt by the shock of lost emotional connection, predisposed to become heart types, and those most traumatized by the shock of lost trust, inclined toward mental types. Is it really so one-to-one, in other words? Or does the causality perhaps work the other way around? So if the child has an already natural predisposition toward a particular center, body, heart, or mind, does that make the infant more prone to a particular shock? Which way does the causality to go? If we're seeing something together, that doesn't prove causality. And then we still don't know which way the causality goes. The question, like all nature-nurture questions, is intriguing but not always very enlightening. Its answer will lie at the level of knowledge about. Useful, interesting, perhaps necessary to seek, but only a placeholder until a more complete theory arrives. So that's another good caveat that he's throwing in there. These are as useful, I suppose, as they are to you, but we can't necessarily take them to the bank, is what he's saying, that this creates that or that creates this. But we do see these linkages, he's saying, as you look at childhood development and you look at the adults and so on and so forth. So then he goes into this thick, dense paragraph here. So the causal connection between the three shocks and the three centers of experience is conceptualized. The cumulative effect of the three shocks upon the child's ability to remain open to the full flow of energy, of life energy, is a gradual loss of presence and the emergence of reactivity and a loss of harmony. So he's basically saying it's not so much about the specific, or literal connection between these three, but that all of them together are contributing to this loss of presence that the infant and the child is experiencing. The loss of presence, the loss of joy, the loss of awareness of other people's awareness. So there's this gradual slide as these three all kind of work together. Because remember, he's saying that the infant is experiencing all of these, but there's one that usually predominates.
Mm-hmm.
But the whole overall effect is this gradual loss of that sense of presence. Remember that presence that is before language, that perfect, contemplative presence in the sense that the infant is not thinking about it because the infant can't think about it. There's a loss of that. He said that the joy comes from that quality of presence. So there's a loss of that. And then there's a loss of the sense of awareness as well. So that is just slowly, gradually being lost as the child ages.
I would add there, Dave, that in cases of trauma, it's not so gradual, right?
Absolutely. Yeah, if the parents in the household are keeping a lid on the trauma, then this is the picture that he's showing us. But you're absolutely right. So a person's actual connection to original energy cannot ever be lost. If it were, one would simply cease to exist. But awareness of the connection can be lost. And as it is lost, a blockage of energy occurs. So I liken this, specifically to kingdom. You know,
Mm-hmm.
Jesus talks about kingdom in the same way that he's talking about this, precognitive presence, joy, and awareness. Because Jesus always is holding up the child as the emblem of kingdom. See how this child is operating? See how this child experiences everything around it? This is what kingdom is. Kingdom is that kind of precognitive presence and joy and awareness. But it's not out there someplace, it's already within. We are absolutely made of God's stuff in the sense of our innate connection to God. And that cannot be lost. What is lost is our awareness of that connection. I mean, that's the whole thing that's going on as we grow out of childhood. We lose that connection, that ability to innately connect with who we really are, the true self, that I as opposed to the me. That's what's lost. And so we lose a sense of kingdom because we grow into the egoic shell, as he calls it here. But we are one with God. We are absolutely connected with God, but we lose the awareness, or that awareness is blocked as we experience what we experience, and we gradually or suddenly lose those centers of connection. So I see this as just closely following.
Mm-hmm.
Jesus was teaching us about kingdom, if we understand kingdom correctly.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I remember that I've told you this story before, that there was this Aramaic scholar who I had the opportunity to connect with. He actually came and did a Sunday session at the Effect early on, and he had uh, an understanding of faith healing that went along the lines of that everything is energy. The energy is flowing through us. Spirit is energy, and so it's always in motion. But sometimes that flow, that motion gets blocked. Wherever it gets blocked, that's going to be an illness within us. And so the role of the faith healer was to help the person unblock the flow. If the flow could be unblocked, if energy spirit could move again, then then the person would be quote unquote healed. And I think that kind of relates one to one with what he's talking about here. So the awareness of the connection can be lost, and as it is lost, a blockage of energy occurs. Now he's going to relate this to Shi, which is the life energy that Tao speaks of. But the blockage acts like a kink in a hose. So at some point there is a blockage there. And then he uses this example from trees. When the tree's life energy is diverted outward toward a new branch, a mark within the fiber of the wood at the place where the original energy changed course. And we call that mark a knot hole. That's what it looks like in the fiber of the wood. Now he's saying something similar happens in developing children's consciousness. As awareness of original essence is lost, life energy is constricted, forming a kind of psychic knot hole. And the psychic knot hole is a pattern of reactions that crystallize like a protective shell around the knot hole. The reactions, the shell is the ego. And then he says, it makes this comment, all egos, regardless of their eventual type, that would be the Enneatype, are basically the same. They are the result of the soul's identification with form as it loses sight of its nature as formless consciousness. So what we really are, right, as an entity here, is formless consciousness. We are consciousness. That's who we are. That's our true self. That's our I. But when we lose that connection coming out of the bliss of infancy, right, and childhood, then we have to identify with something else. We can't just be free floating. If we're not identifying with pure consciousness, then we're going to be identifying with something that has form. He says that is to say, the infant gradually becomes convinced by these shocks of embodiment, right, that he or she is this body with these feelings and these thoughts, and that he or she is only this. That's the illusion of the ego, that we are everything that we can think about, the body, the feelings, the thoughts. Anything that the ego can conceptualize, we start to identify with that because we've lost connection with what is formless. It is this identification, I am a me and only a me, that ultimately makes us feel separate, alone, and lost. I mean, this is something that we've been talking about the whole time that we've been talking, right? Just a different vocabulary, maybe a different image of looking at the same thing. Is that useful, do you think?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah, it sounds similar to just sin consciousness, illusion of separation. I know that I live in my head, so that separates me from contact. I feel myself drifting from other people because I'm here. And yeah, I just think that feeling that I'm separate convinces me that I'm separate.
And when we talk about sin consciousness, let's make sure that we understand that sin is not just unlawful behavior, because that's what we typically reduce it to, unfortunately, in Western Christianity. You know, sin is something that we do that's unlawful and therefore verboten. But here, what we're talking about sin is in the actual true sense of missing the mark. And that's what harmatia actually means in terms of the original biblical language. But missing the mark of what? Well, missing the mark of formless consciousness, missing the mark of absolute oneness with God in a formless way or level.
That awareness we've lost.
The awareness that we've lost, the presence that we've lost, the joy that we've lost. We're missing the mark of all of that because now we are identifying with what we can conceptualize. And as we're thinking about our thoughts and we're thinking about these things that we can put into thoughts, then we are no longer conscious of the deeper self. We've missed that mark. So that's the sin consciousness we're talking about, as opposed to just doing bad things.
Mhm. Hmm.
So without this awareness of our formless nature, our spiritual oneness, then we're going to latch on to the physical form. We're going to latch on to the mental processes that can think about the physical form and all the emotions and everything that's attached to that. And the more we identify with that, the less we can identify with who we really are. And so salvation to a Jew, and salvation when Jesus is talking about it, is going to be the liberation, the spiritual liberation right here and right now from this constricted prison of identification with the ego. When we can transcend that, when we can get beyond that, that's the liberation. Now we're able to rejoin kingdom, re-become kingdom,
Hmm.
and enter into that kind of presence, joy, and awareness once again, right here and right now. It's not something that happens after we die. It's now.
Right. Nirvana.
So
Right.
is he kind of talking here, Dave, about the infant is developing an ego that early? Is this protective shell sort of like now they become a me, I? Is that what he's saying, kind of? I mean, because
Mhm.
and then we shed it later or learn about ego later, but I don't know. He refers to that knot hole, the kink, the shell becomes the ego.
Mhm.
Um, I'm just thinking of little children that begin to be very, me focused. I'm alone, I'm separate, I have to protect myself, I have to get what I need. And I don't know, is that what he's talking about?
It is, but I mean, we're talking about something that's also gradual. And child development and psychology is not my lane,
Mhm.
But I think what we can say is that when we watch children grow up, we watch them gradually become the adult consciousness or the young adult consciousness. And there are stages to it, of course. What are the terrible twos? But the 2-year-old, starting to realize that their needs and desires and will can diverge from the people around them. And so the favorite word of the 2-year-old is no, right? So they are realizing that they can actually exert this will. So there's that gradual becoming of what he's talking about. And the more that there is any kind of trauma, the more violent and rapid this loss can be in the child. But yes, it's gradual. I mean, Jesus would have been naturally pointing at toddlers and those who are running around in the street with him as he's playing with them and holding them and doing the things he was doing. So he can still point to them and say, hey, that's kingdom. There it is right there. Look at it. Look what it looks like. Look how it manifests. And then look at your life and make the contrast. And so we're just not talking about infants here. I mean, we were talking about within the first 6 months or the second 6 months for certain areas, but that's not this whole development of ego and shell. That's going to be a longer period of time.
Mhm.
Okay.
And Russ Hudson would say, with the development of the ego, it's not just around trauma or failures or things of that nature. It's around victories, right? It's around when things are going your way and you figure out what's your stick, basically. And you can see that developing fairly early with children, and you just learn what you're better at and what you're not good at, and just go with that.
Mhm.
Whatever gets rewarded, right, just begins to shape you naturally.
And this has everything to do with the development of the shadow too, right? When you think about it. Now, if a child is really good at something, a talent or something that they have, or they're very good looking or whatever it happens to be, if that
Mhm.
is positive and rewarded, then they learn to identify more and more with that. You will get whatever you subsidize, you get more of, right? So
Right.
if it's being rewarded, then they're going to do it more and more and more. And they're going to learn that that's their go-to. That's what they can rely on. That's in their back pocket.
Right.
Conversely, the things that are not accepted by the parents, the family, the groups that they're in, those are the ones that are going to get shoved into the shadow. And they can be positive as well as negative. They can be very, very good traits, that are going to serve them well as adults. But as a child, they just annoy the heck out of the parents. They're just so difficult to deal with, the willful child, whatever it happens to be. And so a lot of those really strong attributes are also getting shoved into the shadow because the child has learned this gets me punished, this gets me rewarded, and they behave accordingly. And so part of what we're talking about here in spiritual formation, in this work that you do psychologically, whatever, is to reintegrate the shadow. You got to get back down there, find out what's in there, what happened, and how it can be reintegrated. Now, some of the things that are in the shadow are there for good reason. They're always going to be antisocial. They're always going to be harmful. But we still need to know that they're there. We still need to own them, and we need to find ways to dissipate them. And we do that ritually. That's the way we can ritualize. Because remember, the unconscious doesn't know the difference between a ritual act and a real act. And so you can still use the ritual to be able to act out some of the negative energies of the shadow and screaming into a pillow, punching a pillow. Rohr made a big deal about the Catholic Mass liturgy as incorporating both positive and negative, and that the shadow could be dissipated through participation in the liturgy. So there's that too. So there are these ritual ways of being able to deal with that. Some of them are corporate, others are individual, but we need to be able to reintegrate all of that.
Mm-hmm.
There's also the piece that I know I brought this up before about epigenetics and the influence that might be there from that, and also attachment styles, and even the attachment styles of the parents, and how does that factor in to the three centers that he's referring to, and how does that get played out?
Yep.
Absolutely.
And real quick, Danielle, what is epigenetics again? What is that?
Does anybody know? I've actually just learned the term a while ago, so I haven't really done much research, but I believe it's the epigenetics. Like, there's been studies done about traits that are passed down from children of Holocaust survivors and stuff, that they're noticing that even though they didn't experience the Holocaust, there's some still trauma stuff going on, even generations after.
Right.
Like depression or different things.
Yeah,
Depression
and in other groups too, but
Okay.
that was one group that they were talking about.
Okay. Interesting.
I am no expert on epigenetics at all, but I know that it's talking also about how behaviors and experiences can actually change the underlying genes, without altering their main function, but can alter them as well. Is that for real? I don't know.
There's got to be an impact somewhere. I'm sure that impacts it on some level.
And I'm sure some of those will create a knot. What does he call it?
Kink in the hose.
A psychic knot.
Yeah.
The knot hole.
Knot hole, psychic kink.
Brady, did you say that you worked in child psychology or child development?
I took a course from a guy named Charlie Leaf, who was a genetic epistemologist. And so that's genetic epidemic, that's that. And so that was his whole area of study, was the genetic predispositions to behavior, to personality, to the way the brain develops, and what kinds of circumstances have an impact on it. Epidemiologically.
That's a great word.
Yeah.
So how does all of this square with your training, Brady, and Beth too?
Which part?
Well, mainly, it could be the epigenetics as well, but really more his take on the childhood development and the development of the ego or egoic shell, all of that. Did that track for you all?
It certainly does. I mean, in the work that I've done, and way back school, ego was initially considered a mechanism. It was not conscious, and it was a mechanism in the organism that the infant was.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and that as the child develops, this mechanism begins to take form in terms of how it navigates, how it responds to, how it reacts to situations. So I think at that point, you could look at traumas, difficulties, losses, um, and in that theory, it wasn't so much the loss itself, but it was instead how the child coped with it. Folkman and Lazarus have this model for coping, and it goes like this, and it can happen at a very primitive level. Someone is confronted with a threat or danger or something that threatens survival, and they make a preliminary assessment of this threat. Then they make a secondary assessment of what their resources are to deal with the threat. And so if they have resources that are adequate to deal with the threat, then they apply them and they can be said to be coping. But the resources that they use become part of their identity. If that makes any sense.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
If they fail, then they look externally for resources. And they don't identify with those resources. They become dependent on those resources or victim and reliant upon those resources. But it's just really interesting to me that when the coping mechanisms are adequate, then they identify with whatever their behavior was, uh, then they can be said to be coping. Otherwise, then they're not coping. And that forms the identity. And so it's consistent with what you were saying, William. It can be a positive thing that contributes to their identity, or a failure, like
Mm-hmm.
the trauma that contributes to their identity.
Mm. I like that way of thinking about it, right? When you think of like an internal versus external locus of
All
control,
right, honey, do you need to talk?
Exactly.
where I really like that. Yeah, victories and defeats, right? And
Mhm.
defeats you leads to the dependence, the relying on the external, versus victories, you become more sure-footed, or
Right.
maybe even a little more proud, right? Mm,
And what I really like is, again, the way that this dovetails with Jesus' teaching, you know, from obviously a non-clinical way of looking at it, but still uh, the notion of kingdom and the way Jesus taught kingdom and how he used children as an emblem is just, to me, it's just parallel, right down with this psychological take.
mhm.
And of course, there's going to be then the parallels with the Tao that he's going to be bringing out throughout the project as well.
The
So
thing that interests me, just I want to throw out there really quick, is the imperfection of children. I had this idea that, when Jesus said the things he did about, be like that,
Mhm.
that there was sort of this generalized, I don't know, flawlessness.
Mhm.
But when we think about continuum, that isn't the thing. It's a process, and there's room for error, and there's room for messes. I
Mm.
like that.
Mhm. Mhm.
mhm.
Mm.
I got you, Brady, too. That made sense to me.
Mm. I remember a year or two ago, and I've been processing this that dying, I'll call it a dying experience that I had had. And I remember talking with our group on a Tuesday night and saying that I had come to realize that what I had experienced wasn't some kind of stage in the death process, but I had come to this experience of the absolute absence of the egoic mind, and that what I had experienced was kingdom. And the words that I assigned to it only came afterwards
Mhm.
because there were no words. There was just experience, just experience, no reflection, just experience.
The formless consciousness.
Mhm. Yes.
Yeah, it was cool.
Yes. Wow.
That's how everything is connecting here, right?
Mhm.
That's the idea. What we're trying to do in contemplation is get back to the formless consciousness. We're trying to get back to the garden where we don't even know we're naked, you know? But as soon as we start thinking again, then, reflecting again, then we're back into the ego.
Yeah.
Now, that's a necessary thing for us as adults, don't get me wrong, right? But we want to know the difference and we want to understand that we're code shifting between the two. We're becoming bilingual in these two ways of processing experience as an adult human. And the child doesn't have that ability. The child can only do one side of the equation. And unfortunately, most of us adults can only do the other. But the contemplative, the mystic, has learned how to oscillate between the two. And that's what we're trying to do.
It's kind of like that little Doug Bowers had a little frame thing on his desk. I've seen it other places. You probably have too, but what it says is dance like nobody's looking.
Mhm.
And it's a similar kind of thing. You know, children act as if no one's looking.
Mhm.
And that's perfect, that as if no
Mhm.
one's looking is the part of us that doesn't know we're naked, right?
Right.
That's the part that is completely unaware of any sort of reflection on the moment, either internally or awareness of anyone else's awareness on us. So that's that beautiful pure presence we're talking about. That is the precursor of the joy. The joy is the causal effect of that kind of presence. And so that's what we're trying to get back to when we are working contemplative practice. We're trying to find the mechanism, the actual method that we can get to that place. We can't make it happen. We just create the ideal conditions for it to happen. Just like the parable of the growing seed that we were talking about on Sunday. This farmer does all the work, but then goes home and goes to sleep. And while the farmer's sleeping is when the miracle happens. Can't make the seed grow. You can just create the ideal environment for the seed to grow. And remember, the whole parable is the kingdom of heaven is like. It's like that. Can't make it happen. You show up and create the ideal environment, and then go to sleep. Let it happen. Allow it to happen. Allow the moment to be enough. And then we're in this state that we're talking about, that is kingdom, that is like the child's experience. And if we understand that, especially as contemplatives going back and forth, and then we understand when we step out of the ego, we're stepping out of our enneatype, we're stepping out of our personality, we're stepping out of everything that nurture has created in us. We're stepping back into our actual nature. But when we step back into the ego, step back into the enneatype and everything else, we can still work with that. And the idea is to get more and more balanced, bring that awareness from the I experience back into the me experience, and then use that awareness to continue to make sort of CBT decisions, cognitive behavioral decisions, to continue to grow that me into a more and more balanced and healthy ego. We don't want the tail wagging the dog, in other words. And unfortunately, for most of us, the ego wags the dog. We want to be able to, even in our cognitive moments, still see the ego as the tool that it is. We are not the ego. We are not the emotional triggers. We can make other decisions than the ones dictated by those mechanisms in us. So he concludes, according to the Enneagram, one of the ego's major illusions is the belief that it can undo the effects of this loss of original wholeness. That's huge, right? So according to the Enneagram, one of the ego's major illusions is the belief it can undo the effects of this loss of original wholeness. That's kind of like saying that you can beat alcoholism or any addiction without the first step of admitting that you're powerless. See how that works? We have to realize we can't pull ourselves up by our bootstraps. We can't, by sheer force of will, make this happen. The ego wants to regain the lost fullness, but since it does not remember how it lost it in the first place, it can only do so through its own striving, and thus can never succeed. It is forced to create a facsimile, a false copy of the lost quality. The full-blown container of this facsimile is called an enneatype. One of its basic patterns is a tendency to experience events either viscerally, emotionally, or mentally. Regardless of which tendency we have, our enneatype veils our awareness of original energy, prompts us to seek it elsewhere, and thus prevents us from accessing its power. No matter how knowledgeable, how skillful, or how well-adjusted our personality is, it is fundamentally a mark of lost connection to the only energy that can bring us true peace and happiness. It keeps trying to find alternative sources of energy, peace, and joy, but it cannot. And this is why no matter how much we learn, how successful we are, or how many friends we have, we continue to suffer. The ego may have helped us survive the pain and traumas of childhood and get on with life's journey, but it can never carry us home. The constriction of each individual ego has effects upon the whole human community, and indeed the entire world. Here it sounds like we're getting more into epigenetics, right, Danielle? The Taoists believe that all living beings are sustained by one field of Qi, the breath of the original life force. Any limit placed upon the natural flow of life force within one part of a field to some degree restricts that flow within all other parts. I read that again. Any limit placed upon the natural flow of life force within one part of a field to some degree restricts that flow within all other parts. The constriction of each ego thus serves to constrict all others. Our collective maintenance of this constriction is called the obscuring of Tao. Hindus call it Maya. Buddhists call it samsara. Christians name it original sin. Interesting, huh?
Yeah.
As I was reading this, I was remembering John Donne's poem, No Man is an Island. You know, any man's death diminishes me, therefore do not inquire for whom the bell tolls, it tolls for thee. That idea that we are all part of this together. Any restriction, any loss over here is a loss throughout the whole.
What you do to the least of my brothers, you do to me.
Yes, yes. Jesus is saying the same thing. That's how this all dovetails together so beautifully. But the constriction of each ego thus serves to constrict all others. And our collective maintenance of this constriction, in other words, our collective attachment to the ego, that's what's the constriction he's talking about. The constriction is the ego. So the more that we continue to identify with it, the more we continue to attach to it. I mean, when we look at the craziness that's going on in our country right now, left and right and all of this, what is that except the display of attachment to ego?
Right.
We have so identified with the position and the emotional triggers and the emotional reactions to these triggers that what we see is just this chaos and this inability to connect and to even dialogue. That's our collective maintenance of this constriction, our collective maintenance of this attachment to the ego.
Right.
And in Taoism, it's called obscuring the Tao. In Hindus, it's called Maya. Buddhists call it samsara, and Christians name it original sin. So the original sin that we're talking about is the loss of the presence and the joy and the awareness that took us out of kingdom, necessarily so. Remember, this had to happen. We had to eat of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. Otherwise, we would never become functioning human adults. We would never have the ability to choose, and we wouldn't be able to love as a result of all that. So it's not that this is original sin isn't bad, it's just original. It's the original missing of the mark of pure presence. But the good news is we can get it back.
Well, and he's leading us right into with the Enneatype saying that's one of our veiled methods of how we respond to the world. And so I think that's, in my opinion, that's why understanding what your Enneatype is can help you see the pockets and the knot holes and all the things that we want to be more aware of. So to me, it's helpful to know how we react and how our ego is taking over so we can figure out why is that happening and what can I do to be aware of that and do something different about it.
In a Richard
Hopefully
Rohr
it's
video I was watching, he talked about countries with different Enneagram types.
interesting.
Oh, that's interesting.
Interesting.
Like
Like
America is type 3, the performer.
Okay, do that.
Interesting.
And what's Canada and what's Russia? That'd be fun to see what they are. That's interesting.
I know Costa Rica was a type 9.
Ah,
And I felt it
Right.
when it was born.
That's why you're headed in that direction. Creepy.
That's funny.
So I have a question. If all living beings are sustained by one field of chi, is that it?
She.
Chi.
Yeah. Then no wonder we're all screwed up. The whole world is screwed up. I mean, if we're all connected and we think of the chaos in our country, in Sudan, in the entire world, it's like, how do you start to break out of that as an individual?
I think you might be thinking about it backwards a little, Beth.
Okay, help
Yeah,
me.
because the universal consciousnness or the one field of energy that he's talking about, we would call that God in our tradition. That is a state that we're entering into in contemplation. We're going back into that field. And that is all one, that is all connected. There is none of the conflict that we see in that original life force or energy as he talks about it from a Taoist perspective. It's
But
what
I
we
think,
it's what we deviate from. It's the missing of the mark from that individually or collectively in groups that is the chaos that you're talking about.
Okay.
But if we can step aside from that, if we can move through that, through our own spiritual formation, we can move back into that oneness again, which Jesus calls kingdom.
So Beth, you were asking how do you reconnect to that consciousness with all of the discord that's happening
Yeah.
around the world? And as you were describing that, the only thought I had was love, right? That reconnects us to the life force, to the, whatever that
I like that. Thank you.
joyful, whatever thing is.
And then it's important, if we're going to say that, then it's important for us to actually define love, because we got to, and for me, it's always the Thomas Merton definition that works. Thomas Merton said that love is identification with the other. So it's not a feeling, it's not a behavior, it's actually seeing the oneness in the other and that connection from which all the behavior that we would call loving would flow, and then from which eventually feelings of affection or devotion can flow. But the primary idea here is it's identification with. So if we are no longer identifying with, the egoic shell, with what we think of ourselves, and we can actually identify with the other, and then through and beyond the other, to this universal energy that we call God, then yeah, absolutely. Love is the answer.
Yeah.
Oh, I could think of some people that would be challenging with.
Yeah.
Oh,
Does the love the enemy thing come into play here too? I love that too.
Oh, oh,
oh. Yeah, we
la
have
la 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 la.
Like,
uh,
Bill, this is where becoming undefendable comes back into play, right?
Yeah.
yeah. The idea of only my ego can take offense from your ego,
Hmm.
I
right?
don't know if I can say this right, but I was thinking about the phrase "depart from me, I never knew you." And then I was thinking if you reverse that, the knowing of the other is to come close. And so to me, it's like instead of backing away from, it's, opening to
Mm-hmm.
and being known, having the chance to be known and to know others. And that's to me what love looks like.
Mm-hmm.
Perfect.
Mm-hmm.
In Hebrew Aramaic, to know is to be intimate with,
Mm-hmm.
to be completely connected with, and connected over time, over periods of time. To really know the person is to have spent enough time to actually have that kind of intimate familiarity. And so, yeah, depart from me, I never knew you really is inverse, like you said. Since we haven't been intimate, we haven't been connected, we have departed.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, from God's
Mhm.
point of view, that never happens. It's just us. We
Right.
have left the building because we haven't been able to overcome the fear of the kind of vulnerability that's necessary in becoming intimate with anyone or anything. And the only reason we have that fear of vulnerability is because we're still protecting the shell, and we're protecting those programs from childhood. We're protecting all of the stuff that we've used to survive. And it's only now a limitation and getting in the way.
and I think what Lori said too reminded me too, that whole macro and micro thing. Because to me, the macro is more when you're face to face, sitting across the table, nose to nose with someone that has opposite opinions of you. It's a lot easier than the big macro of just hating and throwing a shoe at your TV of this group of people that you've turned into a villain. It's just harder. It's easier when you're talking one-on-one with someone and you can now see them as a human, and it takes energy.
Mm-hmm.
But
Mm-hmm. And it makes me think of love your father above all else and love your brother as you love yourself.
Yeah.
So, given the difficulties that Danielle is pointing out to us of doing what we're talking about doing, now think about these sayings of Jesus and see how they absolutely put the finger right on the problem. Why is love of the enemy the central and pinnacle of love as Jesus talks about it? You know, why is the be you one as I and the Father are one? The ending statement that he has and the ending prayer that he has for all of us. It's this realization that without identifying with each other at the most basic and human level, we're never going to be able to get past the differences that we see. And that identification is the first step, not only in love, but it's also the first step in forgiveness. It's the first step in intimacy. Everything that we're talking about here starts with the ability to identify with the other
Mhm.
at a level that transcends all the differences that are so apparent to us, especially, thinking through the ego. Jesus is brilliant at this, I'm telling you.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
All right, so next week, actually start a new chapter. Oh, wait, next week. We have to talk about next week. So when we do, we start three fundamental aspects of life energy. So we're going to get into those as well. Next week, next Wednesday is the day before Thanksgiving. Let's all vote. Do we want to take that night off in preparation for Thanksgiving and everything that's going on, and then reconvene the week after?
Yeah.
Does that sound like a good idea, or do you guys want to power
Good
through?
idea.
Sounds like a good idea.
Good idea.
Good idea?
Yep.
Okay, so
Well,
we will not meet next Wednesday in deference to Thanksgiving. We'll take the week off. We'll still meet on Tuesday for conversations, and we'll have that, but we'll take Wednesday off, and then we'll start again the week after. And I will send when I send the email out, I'll make that known, but we'll try to hit some of the people that are usually here, make sure that everybody knows. Okay, good. We actually made a decision. Isn't that impressive? Okay, Scotty.
Lord, we're real grateful to be here and spend time with each other and with you and enjoy these teachings. And some of them frustrate us, and we have all kinds of experiences with it, but we're diving in and looking for the meanings and looking for your intention, that when we learn these things, how we are to apply them and how we can just let your love shine through us. We're grateful for that, Father. We're grateful for you, and we're grateful for our families and our friends and our churches. And there's so much to be grateful for, Lord. We love you. It's in your name, Lord Jesus, that we pray and we give our thanks and we say our amens. Amen.
Amen.
Okay, so if you are local, don't forget about Friendsgiving this Friday, the night after tomorrow. We're going to start at 6 o'clock with dinner. And then since what we're planning on doing for the sharing part, which should start somewhere just after 7, we're going to kind of make it our chance to speak more about Nina. And we'll open up the mic and let people talk. So given that, I'll probably go ahead and stream, starting around 7 o'clock. So if any of you who are in remote locations want to see what the community is sharing about Nina, you can log in. And but hopefully you'll be here if you can. And then we'll see you Sunday after that. All right.
You got it.
So all that failing, have a great Thanksgiving, okay? And
Thanks,
we'll
Dave.
see you on the other side.
Good night, everybody.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Good night.
Good night, good night.
Good night. Bye, Jordana. Good night.
Bye, Kathy.
Bye,
Good
Steve.
night. All right, Jordana, good night, dear. So I'll
Okay.
see you Sunday, right?
Yeah, but I'm gonna probably I'll probably get on Friday, just so I can at least be part of the of the part where we talk about Nina.
Okay. So
Um,
you can figure around 7 o'clock for that.
So is that on the window that you do the Sunday
Yep,
morning?
it'll be exactly the same as streaming on Sunday.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, dear.
All
All
right.
right.
Talk
Good
to you
night.
soon.